Let's look at the leg anatomy. I've gotten rid of the handout for this one, so we're just going to look at the anatomy, and you can follow along with your handout as I go through this. I feel like we'll see it easier without that in the way. So I'm going to start with the bony landmarks as usual, and we're going to bounce all over the handout, so I'll tell you what numbers I'm looking at as I look at them, but we're kind of going to bounce around. It's laid out one way in the handout so that it's clear visually, but as we move through, it's a little easier to bounce around like I'm going to do. So the first one to look at is this bump here. That bump is called the trochanter of the femur. It's actually called the greater trochanter of the femur, but we're not going to use the lesser one, which is down here inside. We're just talking about the greater trochanter of the femur, and we'll just call it trochanter of the femur. There are muscles that attach there, as you might imagine, and it's also a landmark that you can see the muscles and bone kind of poke out. You can see them a lot clearer at that point. Sometimes this will show up as a divot in some models as well. So this is a point where the bone is pretty close to the skin. If you reach down to your sides and tap that hard bone on the outside of your hips, it's actually a bone of your leg. It's this trochanter. And that's the only bone, aside from acis and pubis and piscis and the triangle back here, this bone is the other bony landmark in that area that we're going to look at. The other ones we looked at in the torso. So let's move down to the knee and look at these bony landmarks. There's 3 of them to look at. The first one is just a bone itself. We might call it the kneecap, but it's called the patella. This tends to have a contour line on one side and a contour line on the other, so it can be really helpful for describing the front of the knee, as well as being a bony landmark that all of the muscles of the thigh route through this bone and attach to the lower leg. This bone is called a sesamoid bone. It's a bone that helps the tendons ease their way over this joint as it bends to not put so much strain on them. This bone will nest into this space as the leg bends. The bone kind of slides down into that gap. So when the leg is bent, this patella can sometimes be difficult to see. And if your leg is really relaxed, you might even be able to reach down and kind of move it around. Next bony landmark is this one here. It's called the tibial tuberosity. It is number 6 on your handout. That patella was number 5. This is number 6 on your handout. And it is where all of the muscles of the thigh attach. So they route through that patella and attach on this tibial tuberosity. If we look at it from the side, we can see this sort of bow in right here. That's often a telltale sign. At the top of the shin, you'll have this ridge of bone. I can reach down and feel mine right now. The other bony landmark in the knee that we're going to talk about is number 17. It's the head of the fibula, it's called. It's this bony landmark here. And that's quite prominent as well, and it's got muscles that route around it also. Shows up as kind of just a circle at the top lateral side of the leg. Lateral means away from the midline, so think of it as the outside edge. You can reach down and tap on this bone. It's that thin bone in the lower leg, but the head of it is visible usually, and there are some major muscles that are nearby and attached to that spot. That's it in the knee. The only other ones to look at are down here in the ankles, and it's really just a landmark of this bone, which is the tibia, and a landmark of that bone, which is the fibula. And those landmarks are number 10 is the medial malleolus. I didn't name them. The medial malleolus of the tibia and the lateral malleolus of the fibula. And they seem like nitpicky small things to put in, but these really describe the ankle quite clearly. On the inside, you have this bigger, higher bump, and the outside you have this smaller, lower bump. And these are also quite visible in a leg as you're drawing it, and serve as really nice anchor points, really nice opportunities for contour, really nice places where the muscles route through. So one thing to note about these is that the medial malleolus, that's this one in the center here, is higher up than the lateral malleolus. So there's this angle happening in the ankle. That's one of the things where it's really easy to make these straight across from each other. The convincing feel of the ankle kind of gets lost when you do that. So always note the angle there, higher on the inside, lower on the outside. Okay, that will do it for bony landmarks. Let's turn the muscles on and we'll just walk through the muscles from top of the leg down. There's a bunch of different muscles here, but for our purposes, What we're going to refer to these muscles as are the adductor muscles. This is number 1 on your handout. Adduction means bringing closer to the midline of the body. So when these muscles flex, it brings the knees together. We're going to call them adductor muscles, and they show up as just this bulge here in the inside of the thigh. Particularly noticeable if the model is sitting down. The seat pushes these muscles up, and fat tends to accumulate here as well, pushes them up in this bulge. Very often you'll just see this as one single egg-shaped big bulge in the center of the thighs. Next muscle is a dividing muscle, and I'm always on the lookout for dividing muscles. This muscle is called Sartorius. I really quite enjoy this muscle. Look at the trip that it takes. It starts up here at ACIS, and it ends way down here. It inserts right next to that tibial tuberosity we talked about. From ACIS, it shoots in towards the inside of the thighs, wraps around the back of your thigh muscles, which we will name later, wraps down under the knee and attaches back out on front here. It's a crazy trip, but it's nice because it divides quite naturally. It divides these adductor muscles from the main muscles of the thigh that we're going to talk about. The next muscles to look at are this grouping here. We're just going to call them the quadriceps. There are 4 different muscles. So you can see this one really deep, you don't really see from the outside. It kind of looks like 3 muscles when you look at it from the outside. In fact, it's 4. The thing to note here is just the shape. We have patella buried in here. That tendon attaches to the tibial tuberosity. It's almost like an ice cream cone. And then they, for all intents and purposes, they start up here at ACIS. It's actually below ACIS, but it appears to point towards ACIS. And you have this flame shape. I think of it as a flame shape. So we have that C curve on the outside and an S curve on the inside. A really good design to get in your thigh is that kind of sweeping S. I think of it like a flame. These are your powerhouse muscles of the thigh. Running, standing, climbing. They really do a lot of heavy work. Let's bounce around to the back. There's another dividing muscle here and here. And actually, let's just look at this whole grouping. This whole grouping of muscles together is a nice shape to know. This entire grouping of muscles together is a nice grouping to know. So this is what that grouping looks like all by itself. There are 3 different muscles to talk about here, as well as a strap of tendon. So let's just work through them. The first of these muscles is the largest muscle. It's number 14 on the handout. This is gluteus maximus. It's a muscle we probably already know, or at least have heard of. What we may not know are the other 2 muscles, which is this triangular shaped one here. And if I get rid of the others, you can see it kind of takes up a bigger spot than you see, but it's this upper middle area of the 3, and it's gluteus medius. That's number 12 on your handout. And then the third one is this front muscle there, and that's called the tensor fasciae latae muscle. We can just call it TFL. That's what I prefer to call it. So that's the TFL muscle. All 3 of those muscles spread out from this, more or less from this strap of tendon here. And this is called the IT band, or the iliotibial tract. We're going to call it the IT band. And it's just this strap of tendon that heads down and attaches to right near that tibial tuberosity, up a little higher from it. When you're standing up straight, this is actually quite tight. It sort of stabilizes your leg as you're standing. One thing to note about these is the shape as well. You have this I kind of think of it as a flower shape. I know that's kind of weird, but we have the stem here in that strap, and then 3 petals, the big lower petal of the gluteus maximus, the other petal of the gluteus medius, and then the petal of the TFL. Buried in the middle of all of that is the trochanter of the femur. That trochanter of the femur is buried right underneath all of that. So just to note our divider muscles here, are our dividers. We have the IT band on one side, going all the way from ACIS, essentially, if we include TFL, all the way from ACIS down to the knee, to the tibia. We have Sartorius going the other direction around the back down to the tibia, and then inside we have this flame shape of the quadriceps muscles. On the other side of Sartorius, we have these adductor muscles. On the other side of the IT band, we have these muscles of the back of the thigh. We are just going to call these our hamstrings. There are several muscles here, but hamstrings will do. It's kind of the common name for them as well. They show up as this big mass here in the back of the thigh, and they split on either side. So if I'm looking from the back, they split down that side and they split down this side. That's helpful because we get this big mass in the thigh, but we will often see these tendons in the back of the knee. When the leg is bent, this tendon here on the side of the outside of the hamstrings, this tendon becomes quite clear. You'll see it as kind of a straight shot line almost to that head of the fibula and up into this belly of the hamstrings. And the other ones help form this bulge here of tendons and skin and sometimes fat that accumulates there. So that deals with the thigh. We can break the thigh apart into those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sort of regions. Let's move down into the lower leg. There's some important stuff to get here. And we're going to start with maybe one of the most prominent or easiest to see muscles in the calf. We'll call it the calf region. This is Gastrocnemius. They're your calf muscles, and you can see they originate up here in the back of the thigh. They wrap down and bulge out. They're muscles that we use quite a lot, and they attach to the heel, called the calcaneus, but we can call it the heel, via this big strap of tendon, that Achilles tendon or calcaneal tendon. In the lower part of the leg, down here at the ankle, behind the foot, you'll get this ball shape here, the heel, and then you'll get these divots here and there. And then there's the medial malleolus there, lateral malleolus there. So that was gastrocnemius, that's number 8. Hiding behind that is this muscle called soleus. This is number 9. This muscle would just be able to be lumped in with gastrocnemius, except for a lot of times you will have this muscle coming down and you will have a bump right there, sort of an intersection. You can see it here. You will actually see this intersection quite often. So knowing that it's the difference between two muscles, one of which is behind and stays behind, and the other one overlaps. So being able to see that, that's one of those little structural angle changes that are super easy to miss. But once you see it, you can really take advantage of it in the drawing to describe what's going on there. There's a muscle here and a muscle there with a little bit of overlap. Next on our list are these muscles here. There are several muscles with different names, but we are going to call these the long extensors. And just like in the arm where they are responsible, remember the extensors of the arm are responsible for straightening the fingers out. These extensors are responsible for straightening out the toes, lifting up the foot. So lifting your toes up towards your knee, you'll feel these muscles flex. And maybe if you reach down next to your knee, next to that tibial tuberosity on the outside, and lift your toes up and down, you'll feel these muscles flexing. Note that on the inside, we have the shin bone here. This is called the tibia, but it's bone from the knee all the way down. You can see it really well here. All the way from the medial malleolus up to the tibial tuberosity, it's just bone. And you can reach down and tap that bone. It's just right next to the surface of the skin. That's a natural divider. That's a nice divider between gastrocnemius and soleus and these long extensors in the lower leg. The last thing for us to look at are these muscles that run down the side. These are called the fibularis muscles. When you're drawing, you can almost think of these as kind of just straight lines that go down the lateral side. Here's that lateral malleolus of the fibula. These fibularis muscles run behind that and shoot forward. And you can sometimes see this tendon in the lower, underneath the lateral malleolus, you can see this tendon wrapping behind it. A nice little structural detail to be able to get. There's the head of the fibula. And just the fibularis muscles, that lateral outside of the calf, you can just think of it as a bunch of vertical muscles that run from this circle, head of the fibula, straight down to behind that lateral malleolus of that same fibula. Okay, that will do it for bones and muscles of the leg. That's a lot to digest, I know. As with most anatomy, it is a lot to digest. Again, this is just us getting an overview of the names of the muscles, various groupings and things to look for in our effort to get away from drawing that formulaic, generic, non-descriptive human body that we might be used to drawing that doesn't really communicate the feel of the structure of the body so well.